Welcome to the Senior Rehab Podcast,
the podcast for rehab clinicians that want to better serve older adults.
And now, your host, Dustin Jones.
Shorts. Hello, friends. Thank you for the download. Today's Senior Rehab Short comes from Neil Maltby, who has been on this podcast several times, whether it's a Senior Rehab Short or a guest on the show. This article was written on March 22nd, 2016, called Mr. Perfect. Here's some people for whom I've made errors or failings over the last week. These are just the ones I'm aware of. 48-year-old male with history of low back pain following road traffic collision, history of milder version of spina bifida, and was concerned that, in quotes, nerves have come out of his back, end quotes. Avoidant pain behaviors reported alongside unusual descriptive language, in quotes, felt back was coming away from itself, in quotes. He had also seen a myriad of consultants who had told him of a dark disc, but nothing more sinister. This was fairly sinister to him. Initially, I put some of his symptoms down to catastrophization and biomedical focus due to his concern about previous problems with spina bifida as a child. He walked well, and I would not have been suspicious of spina bifida if it was omitted from his history. He then proceeded to Google his symptoms, which seemed to correlate with sacroiliac pain area and symptoms. I obviously dismissed this. Then, serendipitously, I happened across some spina bifida information. The spinal cord doesn't close up, you say. It affects the sacrum. He was fully flexed at time of impact. I'm starting to feel like a donut at this point. To add to the story, this chap could talk too. One of those that could easily get through a 20-minute appointment without doing anything. So a lot of the early stages we went through exercise, but didn't have too much time to do to this. Needless to say, he initially was making no progress, but has since started to see some inroads. 32-year-old male with 18-month history of ankle trauma and 8-week history of further minor trauma, had 2 clear x-rays from attending physician, presents with no restriction in range of motion, but some painful inhibition of version and inversion resistance. Didn't check Ottawa rules due to x-rays, reports initially improving pain severity with active exercise program, then rings in 2 weeks later requesting discharge as they are treating fracture at the ankle. 33-year-old female with long history of episodic bilateral hip and low back pain, no trauma or suspicious history other than some mild abdominal pain she puts down to IBS. On assessment, she is globally hypermobile, which can have abdominal symptomology and poor rotational strength, particularly lateral rotation coupled with abduction. Her hip pain improved significantly over 10 weeks. However, her low back pain and abdominal pain remain constant. I discharged to the GP for further investigation. She called me to say they found 7 spinal tumors, some wrapped around the spinal cord. Could I have referred sooner? 62-year-old male with right knee OA with capsular restriction. I progressed him to impact too quickly and it made his knee really sore. 45-year-old female with low back pain. I mistakenly called the wrong name and so assumed DNA. Reception staff can contact me 10 minutes later. This meant my initial assessment was more rushed than usual. 53-year-old male with long history of low back pain and leg pain, complex history including abuse as a child, suicidal ideation, Addison's disease, bipolar disorder, long-term unemployed, physical activity levels massively connected with social isolation and depression. I've seen him on and off for over 4 years. This week he returned after another period of low mood due to family tragedy. Am I failing him? Error is a human trait, the despised, ingrained in our being. How can I possibly argue that this may be of benefit? Read on. The avoidance of error at all costs is tantamount to perfectionism. Is this what we should be aiming for? There are actually as many problems with lack of error as in its presence. Perfectionism can infiltrate any culture, healthcare, education, science, religion, sports. I feel well placed to see this as I live towards the other end of the continuum. Perfectionists strain compulsively and increasingly toward unobtainable goals and measure their self-worth by productivity and accomplishment. My last blog touched on productivity, so I will address accomplishment and outcome more in this. Perfectionism has been associated with low productivity, procrastination, fear of failure, all-or-nothing attitude, workaholicism, unrealistic expectations, sleep disturbance, anxiety, depression, and even suicide. Healthcare is becoming a perfectionist culture influenced by the users. People don't want mistakes made on their health. Do no harm is our motto. No one will disagree with that. But what do we mean by harm? Absolute harm, potential harm, intentional harm? This would stop all surgery and pharmaceuticals for a start. Probable harm? Maybe it's a utilitarian harm. Overall, is there much more harm than help? That seems sensible, but how is this measured? Lots of tricky questions. We're in a predicament. We want the authority and trust that comes with perfection, but not the burden. Is there even an argument that some harm may be beneficial, build resilience, reduce frailty? And science. Science is one of the dominant ideologies now in the Western world. We must realize science can only hint at our world. It is messy, imperfect, but wonderful. It is acquainted with error. It relies on probability, but science tries to prove itself wrong. Not exactly true. Science is not the findings, the data. Science tries to disprove data, which is good. It is not critical of itself, and why would we expect this? Science is method. Observe, make predictions, test them. Science is meticulous. Control, measure, repeat. But can we agree on this? It seems that scientific method has become a strained attempt at making science more objective. The problem being is that it is not objective, and we couldn't get 100 people to agree on the scientific method and what could be considered part of this. The infamous philosopher of science, Karl Popper, denied a scientific method exists. Popper even asserts science is fallible and has no authority. More contemporary philosophers of science, Kuhn, Lakatos, Feyerabend, criticize the machinations of the scientific method in favor of something more nuanced. Hansen highlights how data, observation, and therefore scientific fact is laden with theory and history. Einstein denies any algorithmic method to science or logic to discovery. Do we give up on science? No. The presence of error is not to be despised, it is to be acknowledged, not sought. Progress is possible in error. Why does any of this matter? How does this apply to the real world? How does society view error and mistakes? Something to be despised, eliminated. Do the public have an ideal of perfect healthcare, or do they see imperfect people and systems trying to work for good? We are sold ideals of perfection, the perfect body, holiday, partner, job, wedding, the American dream. There is a hope in objectivity that robots may be without error. They actually follow guidelines. They have all the latest resources, evidence at their fingertips. This is unfounded and steeped in logical positivism that we can know with 100% clarity. Humans here hold the advantage. We are able to, though don't always utilize reasoning. We can be self-aware. Consider error. The robot only knows its program and sticks to this unless reprogrammed. It does not think of whether it makes an error. There is a greater thing than perfect. It is good. The pursuit of perfection is an illusion. The pursuit of good is something different altogether. It has not only value, but ethics, nuance. There is a difference between a failed outcome and a failing a person. Humanistic care can exist within a failed outcome, as Keith P. succinctly wrote. Failing to treat someone as a person is a cardinal sin of healthcare, not the failure of outcomes. Of course, these can overlap. Informed consent becomes crucial. It's not a question of healthcare professionals making judgments. It is a person who will have to live with the outcome, good or bad. So do we lose our veil of perfection in order to live with error? Or do we allow it to shape us, grow us, inspire us to greater good and not perfection? Our tendency is to downplay, ignore, erase our mistakes. A blogger may retract or delete a post if it never existed. Health systems may hide imperfections, massage data, but when weaved into our story, the narrative becomes stronger. It can lead us to make better decisions or create better systems. Nothing is without error. Don't pretend otherwise. Be more human. Be less robot. Thanks, Neil. Hit me. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. The show notes and much, much more can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. I want to encourage you to go there so you can join me and many others in the movement that's changing the face of geriatric rehab. Just go to seniorrehabproject.com, click join, and you'll be able to get access to our private Facebook group, which can basically serve as your virtual mastermind group. You'll get a short and sweet monthly email from me with useful links for you and your patients. And lastly, you'll get 10% off your first purchase from the Senior Rehab store. So, all of this can be found at seniorrehabproject.com. And until next time, my friends, do not forget to stay funky.